Hello, and welcome to this webinar about STIG hardening on Ubuntu 22.04 with the Ubuntu Security Guide. I'm Henry Coggill. I'm a product manager here at Canonical, working on security features, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar and hope you find something useful. So, what we'll cover today, we will talk about what hardening is, what it means, and who should care about it. I will outline what the DISA-STIG is all about, and then I'll introduce the Ubuntu Security Guide and demonstrate how it can automate the security and compliance requirements. Ubuntu Security Guide is part of Ubuntu Pro, so I'll mention what Ubuntu Pro is and also show some of the extra features and capabilities that are included in Pro, such as the extended security vulnerability patching and the FIPS 140 crypto modules. And then I'll talk a little bit more about the Ubuntu Security Guide tool and how to use it. As we go along, if you have any questions, you can use the if you're on BrightTalk, you can use a little panel to put the questions in, and I'll leave some time at the end to try and answer some of those questions. If you're on LinkedIn, you can also post a question there on the events page. We won't be able to deal with that live, but I'll get to those questions once we've finished the webinar. There's also a blog post attached to this, and it should be linked as one of the attachments, which should cover some of the material here, so you can refer back to it later. So, what is hardening? It can cover a lot of different things. It can cover how to, servers, operating systems, applications, but generally, hardening is about locking down a system. It's about making sure that the default settings really are nice and secure. It's about removing unnecessary components and applications and pieces of software and functionality to reduce the attack surface to the absolute bare minimum, so you know exactly what you're running on your system. There's nothing extraneous. It's about making sure that the operation is secure, so you've got logging and integrity checking. It's about making sure that if you're using encryption to protect your data at transit or in rest, that encryption is used correctly and effectively. And it's about making sure your system is patched and up to date, so that there aren't any known vulnerabilities that attackers can use to exploit the system or to sort of break in. And even if someone does manage to break in an outer layer, because you've removed those unnecessary bits and pieces and you've tightened down the settings, it's about making sure that there's defense in depth. So why wouldn't things be hardened by default? Well, I mean, this is quite a good question. When it comes to something like an operating system, we're talking about Ubuntu here. It's a blank canvas, really. There are a lot of components which we offer to people to build whatever systems they want, whatever crazy applications. People could run an online bank with Ubuntu, or you could use it for developing some software for your Raspberry Pi. It's the same operating system, but very different use cases. So if you're running the bank, or you're handling sensitive data that you don't want people to steal, then obviously you need to take some extra precautions. And that's what hardening is all about. So STIG is essentially a hardening guide, which is published by DISA. So DISA is a combat support agency, part of the US Department of Defense. And it published these security technical implementation guides, obviously a bit of a mouthful. I think everyone just calls them STIGs. And these are based on industry recommendations, particularly what the NIST suggests for hardening systems. And this stuff is backed up by years of expertise. It's all good quality hardening guidelines. Now these STIGs, they are published, as I say, by this department of the DoD, but they are available to download by anybody. I put the URL up there. I mean, to be honest, I just normally just Google for it, and it pops up. You can download the STIGs. They are maybe not the easiest to read. The format is sort of XML documents, so you can use third-party viewers to help you actually read the STIG. But they cover in detail how to configure an application, how to harden it, or in this case, an operating system, There are STIGs available for a huge number of different pieces of software out there. Windows, Mac, Ubuntu, and then you've got web servers, you've got cloud platforms and things. So if you're running applications and you want to harden them, you can look at the STIGs, but obviously for our case, we're going to be looking at the Ubuntu STIG. So these STIGs are developed by DISA, kind of in collaboration with the publisher of the software as well. So we have worked backwards and forwards with DISA to establish what the STIG looks like and how to take a vanilla Ubuntu and how to then configure it for for this hardening. And this process, this takes some time. There's a lot of internal review. We need subject matter experts to come in and check that the STIG that was being developed is accurate and works and fulfills all the requirements. So unfortunately, this does introduce a bit of a delay from the point at which the application or the operating system is released. So Ubuntu 22.04 obviously came out in April 2022, and the STIG wasn't released until earlier this year. So there was a bit of a lag on that front. I guess it's just the price you pay for extra security. So who actually needs the STIG then? I mean, I mentioned earlier that anyone who has production systems or is handling sensitive data should be, concerned with hardening the systems, and that's certainly the case. But actually, the DISA and the DoD publish these things for a reason, because they want everyone who does connect systems to DoD networks to harden their systems according to the STIG requirements. So this includes anyone working in and around the DoD, so defense agencies, space agencies, people, anyone connected with that sort of ecosystem. If you're sending a shuttle to the moon, you probably need to have your systems STIG hardened. There are also other programs within the federal space where they decided that STIG recommendations are a solid baseline. So people running FedRAMP, the latest GAB recommendations suggest that you should harden your systems according to STIG. And obviously the CMMC is a new set of standards for defense contractors, which mandates STIG hardening as well. And also we've seen other industries outside of the DoD also using STIG as a good baseline. So some financial services and online gaming and gambling companies now are sort of collaborating around the STIG to use that as a well-known baseline for hardening their applications. There are alternative hardening guidelines out there. A popular set are the CIS, or the Center for Internet Security. They publish CIS benchmarks for applications, which have a very similar aim to the STIG, and that is they're sort of complementary. You wouldn't want to apply both at the same time because they're trying to do the same sort of thing. And but in this case, we're talking about STIG because a lot of people have a specific requirement for STIG, and that's what we're talking about. So we've had a few questions in already, which I'll try and answer. So someone's asking, Santosh has asked, when should we expect the 2404 STIG? Yeah, this is a good question. As I mentioned, there's this sort of bit of a lag between the operating system being released and then the STIG being developed and then assessed and then approved. And it did take about 2 years for Ubuntu 22.04. The good news is we've already started the 2404 STIG. We've got the first draft done, and these are in the process of having their subject matter experts review it. So it hopefully will be a bit sooner. Someone's asking, are the slides available for this presentation? I think we don't normally make the slides available, no, but the recording will be available through the BrightTalk platform. Okay, so I mentioned the STIG and what it's trying to achieve, but actually when it comes down to it, it's, as I mentioned, this XML document, but it's actually quite a long and detailed and in-depth set of procedures that you need to comply with. I think there are hundreds of different rules and the steps that you need to take, little configuration settings, tweaks, commands to run in order to make your system STIG compliant. And this can be very complicated. it can be time-consuming and, frankly, a little bit daunting. So, in order to try and smooth this, the STIG hardening process, make it easier, we've brought out the Ubuntu Security Guide, or USG tool. So this is a command line utility, and it's based on an upstream project called the Compliance as Code project, which is obviously an open source project, but we've customized it to be specific for the Ubuntu use case. And it actually has sort of two modes of operation. As a, when you want to harden a system to start with, you want to fix it and configure it. But then once that's in place, you then need to check and audit it. A lot of times, people who need the STIG compliance will have to get the authority to operate, and that means getting an independent auditor to come and verify that your system has been configured correctly. And so the Ubuntu Security Guide will be able to generate a compliance report to demonstrate that all the auditing steps, all the sort of remediation steps have been done correctly. And another useful feature of the Ubuntu Security Guide is the fact that you can tailor the steps that the tool takes to meet your specific mission needs. I'll talk about this a bit later, about why tailoring is important and how it works. But for now, I'll just mention that the basic usage of the tool is designed to be pretty easy. So we can just enable it with the Pro client, which I'll demonstrate in a second. And then you can just basically just run it straight away in its default state if you're happy with the with the default settings. But with the tailoring file, you have the ability to configure that, to customize it, and really sort of tune it to make it work nicely. So there are some more questions coming in. Someone's asked, do STIG surpass or on the same level as the ISO standards? Well, they're kind of slightly separate. So ISO standards such as the ISO 27001 is about how a company operates and its security policies and procedures, whereas the STIG is very specific about a piece of technology. And I think the two are sort of complementary. So if you're operating a security framework such as ISO 27001, maybe or maybe SOC 2 or something, or even a FedRAMP system, you'll need to then apply your judgment and then apply the STIG to your particular operating systems. Yeah, and there's another question about the tools for using the STIG, if you dare. I'm not necessarily condoning any particular tool, but I know that you can just Google for STIG viewers and you can find out that STIGs can be then turned into something a bit easier to read than the XML documents. Blake has asked what integrations exist between Ubuntu provided STIG tooling and Ansible or similar tools. Yes, Ansible is a very popular way to configure systems. As it stands at the moment, Ansible is not really part of the canonical and Ubuntu ecosystem, which is why we provide the Ubuntu Security Guide in its sort of vanilla form, and we don't actually have any Ansible integration at the moment, I'm afraid. Right, and I think at this point I should also mention the FIPS crypto modules. This might seem tangential, but having FIPS 140 certified crypto is one of the requirements of the STIG, certainly on Ubuntu. And in order to sort of, to satisfy this demand, so Ubuntu does come with FIPS 140 certified crypto modules, which are available with your Ubuntu Pro subscription. So Ubuntu Pro is not a different version of Ubuntu. It's regular Ubuntu that you can just download and use, but then Ubuntu Pro is a extra set of packages which we make available once you've signed up. One of these sets of packages is the Ubuntu Security Guide, like I mentioned. We also make the FIPS 140 certified crypto modules available, plus some other capabilities, which I'll mention in a second. Now, there's also a bit of a lag between the time the Ubuntu is released and the time we can get our FIPS modules certified by NIST, by CMVP. And at the moment, we had to hit the new 140-3 crypto standards, which came out a couple of years ago. So this has taken a little bit of time, unfortunately. The modules are currently awaiting the interim validation. So they've started to be processed by NIST, and we hope that very soon we will at least have interim validated modules certified by NIST. As and when this changes, we will update the status on our website, and obviously you can look at NIST's CMVP website to find out what the current status of FIPS modules are. But they will be available very soon. And I should also talk about the difference between the different sort of versions of the FIPS modules that we do make available. Because of the timeline, this sort of lag between the modules being submitted to NIST for validation and then them actually coming out of the other end, often we find that there have been security vulnerabilities discovered in these crypto packages that, as part of the regular Ubuntu maintenance, that we would patch and fix and update. But of course, that means that those modules have been subtly changed since they were submitted for validation. Now, obviously, we would encourage everybody to use secure modules and make sure that the vulnerabilities be patched. So we provide FIPS updates versions of the FIPS packages, as well as non-updated versions, which sort of adhere strictly to what the versions that have been submitted to NIST for validation are. Obviously, we recommend everyone uses the updated versions because it's most important to make sure those vulnerabilities have been fixed. So once you've signed up for Ubuntu Pro, I mentioned you get access to extra features and functionality. So I've listed here what you sort of get out of the box with Ubuntu 22.04. So we got the FIPS updates and the FIPS preview, which are the non-updated versions that have been submitted to NIST. But obviously, we recommend everyone uses the updates. Kernel Live Patch is another feature that's available with Ubuntu Pro. So this is a way to fix critical and high severity security vulnerabilities within the Linux kernel at runtime without needing a reboot. So this is very useful if you're running production systems that can't be easily taken down. You can just sort of deploy the security fixes as live kernel modules. So Live Patch is also part of Ubuntu Pro. And we've got the USG Ubuntu Security Guide. And I will talk in a second about the expanded security maintenance as well. And there are also some other services for niche applications. So with Ubuntu, normally we give 5 years of security patching on the main set of packages within the operating system. So this is about 2,500 packages which form the core of the Ubuntu OS, and a set of popular applications which people typically use. And then within the sort of Ubuntu ecosystem, there are like 25,000 other packages which we enable people to use. But until recently, haven't been able to provide full security patching on all this sort of ecosystem of universe packages. But with the introduction of Ubuntu Pro, we've had the capability to then provide full security patching, and we've extended this to up to 10 years now on all the packages within Ubuntu. And so this is what you get with the ESM available with Pro. And if you want to see if you're using any packages from main or universe, there's this Pro security status command which lists how many packages you're using for the different from the different repository endpoints. So even if you don't need FIPS or STIG, Ubuntu Pro is a great choice for for tip-top security, because it makes sure that every single package within your Ubuntu ecosystem is covered for 10 years. I'll just have a quick check for more questions here. So James has asked about the Snap installer, if it's going to get fixed. Hopefully, yes. We are aware of some issues with Snap, and the fix is not totally trivial, but we should make some workarounds. Ed has asked, do we know when the SCAP benchmark will be coming out? I'm afraid I don't. That's not something that we control. Huppel has asked, can we use this for Docker images? So Docker images, at the moment, no, the Ubuntu Security Guide is mainly aimed at vanilla Ubuntu operating system and not for Docker containers or Docker images. Yeah, the sort of Docker containers are in a way pre-hardened and confined in what can go on. So that you can't use the USG tool, but if you're interested in hardened containers, I can recommend checking out the Iron Bank, where we do have Ubuntu containers published which have undergone the Iron Bank's continuous authority to operate checks. So that's that'll probably be the best option for that. I will talk a bit more about the hardening procedures now that that you can do with the Ubuntu Security Guide, and hopefully demonstrate that it's easy enough to do. So first thing I always do on any Ubuntu system is make sure it's up to date. So apt update, apt upgrade, that pulls in all the updates that you need for all the software that's installed via the apt system. Then you need to attach the Pro token to your system and give you those nice extra features that come with Ubuntu Pro. Now, to get the token, you can go to ubuntu.com/pro. You can sign up. It's available for free on up to 5 machines or for personal use. And you can just attach the token there. It's very easy to sign up, and you don't need to, you won't get spammed or anything. Then you just enable the USG tool and install it. And then I mentioned that FIPS modules are a requirement. So as we're here, just enable those FIPS updates too. Some people ask, is this for server or for desktop? Well, actually, so Ubuntu Pro works on both server and desktop, and also the STIG has been written in such a way that it does target desktop usage, and you can also use it for server usage. So hopefully it means that if you run it on desktop, it'll understand that your desktop environment is there, and if you run it on server without a desktop, then it will automatically know that it doesn't need to worry about those non-desktop use cases. So having installed the tool and prepared yourself, I just mentioned also that having installed those FIPS updates modules, the system will need to be rebooted because it pulls in a specific version of the kernel that has the FIPS crypto inbuilt, and so that necessitates a reboot. So that will need to be done. The first thing is to kind of see what state the system is in to start with. So you can just run the USG tool in audit mode. This won't change the system. It will just assess it and then generate a report. And you can see that the report is available in a couple of different formats. There's a HTML report, which can be loaded up in a browser, which is hopefully nice and easy to use. And there's also an XML report. So if you want to ingest that into other application sort of reporting tools and things that understand this particular output, then you can also use the machine readable output. So this will give you a kind of a baseline measure of what the state the system is in, and how many of the requirements are being met and how many are not being met, and what you need to think about. So this is a quick example of what happened when I ran the USG tool audit mode for DISA-STIG on a plain vanilla system that I just installed. So there are some rules that obviously pass automatically, but there are a majority that do fail. So this is where the tool will be able to come in remediation mode and fix those, and then hopefully next time we run it, we'll get a much better score. Now, I talked earlier a bit about the fact that there's some tailoring file, and actually this is the best way to use the tool, because everyone's deployment is going to be slightly different. Everyone will have a different objective for their system, and the STIGs are kind of meant to be pretty comprehensive and cover all aspects of the system. But it means that then if you follow every single recommendation within the STIG, then it might turn out that your system is kind of unusable. I mean, it's sort of one of these platitudes in security that the safest system is one that's turned off, or failing that, one that people can't log into, which is clearly impractical. And if you don't want people to hack your system, don't connect it to the network, don't let people log in, but those are not very useful. So these guidelines within the STIG, they do cover a lot of things, including how people interact with the system, and particularly on the network side, what people can plug in and what people can do, which might actually run counter to what you need to achieve for your mission. And so it's very important to be able to then customize exactly what you do on the STIG when you harden your system. And this is where the tailoring file comes in. So generating a tailoring file essentially gives you a whole list of all the rules that the STIG encompass within the USG tool. And then you can select on and off, turn out which rules you don't want to use. It's also important to note that even the DISA who developed the STIG, they do very much call them guidelines. So if there's a particular reason why you think a rule doesn't apply, or you need to turn it off, or you can then think about what the rule was trying to achieve, and then maybe come up with some other way to get that security benefit that the rule was trying to cover. I mentioned the tailoring file is again an XML document, and I pulled out an example here, which might be specific to individual missions. So one of the STIG guidelines is for disabling automatic mounting of USB mass storage devices. So this is where you don't want to have a plug in a USB stick into your machine and have the machine automatically mounted, because that is a potential security risk. But maybe you decided that actually you do want to have this, and there's a good reason for you to have this, and you've got some other controls in place to make sure that this is not going to be a threat to your system. So then you can just edit this, the tailoring file, and then instead of selected equals true, you can go selected equals false, and then that will tell the tool not then to worry about applying that tailoring file and thus potentially breaking your system. There's also a man page available with the USG, and for the STIG profile in particular, which is definitely worth checking out, because this details some of the manual steps which do need to be taken. So the USG tool can't apply every single one of the STIG guidelines all in one go. Some of them do need to be customized to your specific case. And those ones are detailed in the man page, and I'll cover them in a slightly later slide. And then this is the sort of the denouement. The meat of the process is actually running the tool in fix mode. Having generated that tailoring file and customized it, you use that as an input to the USG fix. And this simple command then will apply all of the different benchmark rules within the STIG, and then turn your system into something that hopefully meets all the requirements. This could take some time. The STIG does check the entire file system for the files like set UID files and sticky bits and things. So depending on the size of your system and how fast it is, it could take some time, but maybe a few minutes or half an hour or something. It will churn through, and probably if it's done some significant fixes, it might need to reboot as well. But that's all fine. You can run that. Now, I mentioned there are some steps you need to take manually. So I'll go through these here, some of them. So one of the things that the STIG requires is to have a smart card login. Obviously, this is something you can't just install automatically. You need to configure this and build it and give people tokens and set it up to work with your identity and access management framework. So this is something that needs to be set up and checked for manually. STIG also recommends installing a third-party security scanning software. So in the olden days, people might have used I don't know, McAfee antivirus or something, Windows Defender, some of these kind of platforms. So the STIG does recommend you use that. This is not part of the canonical ecosystem, so we leave that up to individual users to decide what to do. It also recommends putting a password on the grub bootloader to make sure people can't reboot the system and then modify any of the parameters to bypass security features. Setting passwords needs to be done manually because the USG tool doesn't know what password you want to use. Another important consideration is the firewall rules. This is typically the kind of a bone of contention where people have applications, or you have a system maybe even in the cloud, and you harden it and it turns the firewall to max, and then suddenly you can't log into the system. It becomes unusable. So the USG tool tries not to wreck your system and prevent you from logging in. So you do need to go through and just check that the firewall has been configured to your particular mission. And I mentioned that everyone has different mission parameters. I think the STIG recommends not having an HTTP server, but maybe your mission is to have an HTTP server, so you need to manually check that. Another one to be careful about is the STIG recommends offloading your audit logs to an external system to make sure that you can be alerted to anything that happens and that the logs can be preserved. This can't be done automatically by USG tool. You need to work out what other systems to put the logs onto and configure that yourself. Full disk encryption obviously is an important one. Again, this needs to be done when you build the system and can't really be done afterwards. So hopefully when you install Ubuntu, you enable the full disk encryption. And then there are a couple of things just to check. USG tool can't know whether people are authorized for sudo or not, so you just need to check that manually. And the STIG also recommends that all the SSL certificates on the system have been approved by the authorizing authority. Again, we don't know who or what the authority might decide is approved, so you'll need to check that that those do match the requirements that you have. So once that's all done, then you can run your audit to make sure that everything is passed. So again, this is using the tailoring file as an input. You get USG audit with a tailoring file input, and that will obviously know which of the rules you decided don't apply. And hopefully everything passes, or as near as damn it passes. I will say that this can be an iterative process as you're sort of developing the best configuration and the best tailoring file. You might want to try it, and then if something doesn't work, you can go back, fix it, and then try again. Maybe even turn this into a sort of a golden image that you can then spin out to other instances as well. So there might be some iteration, but that's absolutely fine. And also, the end goal is not necessarily to have a 100% green and nothing not green. You need to apply a level of sort of judgment to the system. You want to have a functioning system with a decent level of security. It's got to do what you need to do. Obviously, you can focus on the high severity results because the STIG rules are broken down into sort of high, medium, and low severity levels. So you can obviously work about the most severe ones first, critical ones. Worry about those, and then take the rest, whether or not that meets your security posture. There's also sort of consideration about just how much further you want to take this. So I mentioned this sort of external logging system, which is sort of outside the scope of the individual system, but more about how you run the whole operation. Because the STIG configures the system to generate audit alerts if anything unusual happens. And I guess if you want to then take it to the sort of the next level, you want to ingest those audit reports and the system logs into a central SIEM system that can understand what the logs are and generate alerts and give you a sort of a workflow. And again, with the file integrity monitoring that STIG recommends, we provide the AIDE, the aid tool within Ubuntu to do this. But you need to configure the alerting to fit in with whatever workflow system you have already. So if you want the sort of the max level, you'll need to take some steps sort of outside the confines of this specific system. But that's obviously up to individual use cases and risk profiles, which I think is kind of outside the scope of what can be provided with the Ubuntu Security Guide tool. So that's hopefully covers how the tool is used and what the capabilities are, and what sort of other steps you might need to do outside of that. I will now sort of cover some questions that have been coming in. I know I tried to answer a few as it went along, but actually we've got a lot more coming in since then, so I'll try and go through those step by step now. And I'll also mention that we have some more webinars coming up from Canonical. So if you're interested in the Cyber Resiliency Act, which is a big framework that's come out in Europe recently, we have a couple of pieces in the next couple of weeks about CRA. So Joel Hellmeister, one of our compliance engineers, InfoSec guys, will be talking about that in the context of what it means generally, and also how it applies to devices. And then we also have a discussion on the 6th of November about open source dependencies, long-term support, particularly with a focus on Docker containers. So I will answer some questions now that I might not have got to. Santosh has asked, will USG work on a cloud VPS instance? Yes, it should work on a cloud. It doesn't really care where it's running as long as it's an Ubuntu operating system. I mentioned it doesn't really play well with containers at the moment, but you can use other sources of hardened containers such as Iron Bank. Tom has asked, as the STIG is versioned, which is the case, so DISA update the STIG around every quarter. How long of a delay should be expected before the USG tooling is updated with the new content? This is a good question. It kind of depends on how much internal capacity and resource we have, and what other projects we've got going on at the moment. So we'll do the best we can. I would also say you don't need to necessarily be super panicked about a new version being released. Obviously, the old version was fine, and people have decided that maybe they can update it, but it shouldn't be something that that sort of throws you totally out of kilter. Mozen's asked about how does it integrate into SIEM-based tools. So I mentioned the XML audit report. Yeah, it is a sort of XML format, and I can't say which tools understand it, which tools don't. You might just have to experiment. There's a whole ecosystem of automation and tooling out there within the SIEM space. Amir asks, are there any default STIGs anyone can look at using? So yes, the STIGs are all based on general purpose guidelines. So there's a DISA producer general purpose operating system framework, which we use as the basis for the STIG. So you can look at those if you like, although they are, I think for obvious reasons, are quite general in their approach and don't really give you specific recommendations. But if you're using a system which doesn't have a dedicated STIG, then you could use the general purpose guidelines to sort of inform your hardening choice. Dante has asked if you can use USG to harden CIS benchmarks instead of STIG. Absolutely, you can. I think everything I said here can be applied to CIS benchmarks as well. As I say, we work with them to produce benchmarks, and if the benchmark is available and we have encoded up a USG profile for it, that will become available with the USG tool, and that's certainly the case for Ubuntu 22.04. Adam is asking, when I mentioned the FIPS modules, they're FIPS 140-3. Yes, that's definitely right. 143 is the new standard, and that will be everything that we do going forward will be on 140-3. 140-2 is being deprecated and sunset within the next year or two, so nothing in future will be using that. Richard asked, is any of this talk relevant to non-pro versions of Ubuntu? Potentially, you can harden your system with whatever tools you like. You don't need Ubuntu Pro, but if you want your FIPS crypto for the STIG, you need Ubuntu Pro for that. John is asking, what's the current status of the 22.04 CMVP approval? Well, yes, the modules were submitted a year ago for NIST approval, and I think the whole industry was finding that NIST were quite overwhelmed with the new standard and the level of modules that needed to try and comply with. So we're in this interim validation scheme at the moment where NIST are just processing the modules much faster to try and clear the queue, which they're doing quite well. A lot of modules have now been gone through this, and I understand that the Ubuntu 22.04 modules are being processed very soon. So keep your eyes peeled for an announcement about that. We'll certainly make an announcement when that's ready. Dean's asked, are the input and output files compatible with DISA-STIG Viewer 2.17? I can't give you an answer about that right now, I'm afraid. You just might need to try it and see. Kevin asks, will deployment of the STIG on a pro system automatically put the system in FIPS mode? So the answer is no. I mentioned on an earlier slide that you need to specifically enable the FIPS components, but by doing Pro enable FIPS updates, that will then bring the system into FIPS mode, and the USG tool will just check that the particular SSH configs and things are all according to the FIPS recommendation. So James has asked, can the slides be available for reference? I mentioned earlier that there's a blog that's attached to the presentation. You can also, I think, just Google for that. And that I've tried to make sure that the blog covers the same sort of material so that people can copy and paste commands. James has also asked, can you use this on an isolated or air-gapped machine? This is a good question. The answer is not totally straightforward. So what USG does is it does configuration, but also whether a packages it needs, it will just pull them in from the archive, which means that if there are packages that need to come in an air-gapped system, you'll need to use the normal air-gap update route. This is a kind of a topic for a whole nother webinar, but it is possible as long as you have a route to be able to get the latest set of packages you need, or you can do it on an online system, work out what packages need to be pulled in, put them on your isolated machine, and then you can pull the package, and then you don't need to go live to update it. So it can be done air-gapped or isolated, but it is a sort of a level of complexity up. We're kind of aware that this is a bit of a yeah, sort of maybe a trouble point, and I know some of the teams are specifically working this year on trying to make Ubuntu easier to deploy in air-gapped environments. It'll involve using the landscape asset management system, which has repo mirroring facilities in it. So that is going to be coming up hopefully fairly soon. Amir asks, can you run this on an already configured server? Absolutely, you can, yes. If you're trying to update the system in fixed mode, you'll have to look at what's going on very carefully, and I wouldn't do it on any production systems. But you can certainly audit, and then in audit mode, the system won't change it. Dean asks, can the tool produce XCCDF files compatible with STIG viewer? In theory, the files are XCCDF, but I'm led to believe that the output of the tool sometimes doesn't play nicely with STIG viewer. We're still investigating that. George has asked, can we get a copy of those commands? As I say, they should all be on the blog post. James has asked, my audits have taken hours. Is that typical? It can take a long time. Yeah, I mentioned that the whole file system needs to be scanned. So if there's a big file system, then the audit can take a long time. I guess that, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. I hope if you can, you can schedule it in a downtime or overnight or something. If you apply default STIG, can individual rules be turned off later? I guess probably not, because once the fix has been applied, then the system is in that new state. Jeff asks, does Ubuntu have a security scanning software in lieu of McAfee, etc.? Basically, the answer is no, we don't provide security scanning software. So what we do is we provide the operating system, and then we provide the security maintenance for all those packages. And then we think that is good for our customers. If customers want additional reassurance about if the systems are up to date and there's nothing dodgy running, that's up to the ecosystem of security vendors out there. So I won't talk about that. Jonathan asks, can we use YubiKeys rather than smart cards? Possibly, but I mentioned that this is all stuff that has to be configured individually, and I can't really offer you a sort of a complete solution on this webinar. We might be able to look at something in the future on that one. Dean asks, can the tool produce a list of commands to be run manually from the command line instead of automated scripts? You can generate a fix output script, yes, which then you can process and audit and validate however you like. So yes, I didn't cover the usage of generating a fixing script in this presentation, but it's certainly possible if you just have a look at the options with the USG tool. So Masood asks how to disable the FIPS mode. Well, this is not recommended. I think when you enable it with Pro Client, it does say, warning, this is a one-way operation, and we wouldn't normally consider that to be a use case that we would test for. Normally, if people want FIPS, then they want it and they turn it on, and those requirements don't usually go away. Santosh asks, are CIS hardened images already maximized to meet USG findings? I guess CIS is a separate set of standards to what the STIG is done, but yes, if you use the hardened image, then it should meet the findings. Ashish has asked, where can I find the recordings? As I missed the beginning, I think if you go to BrightTalk, which is the sort of the hosting platform for these presentations, then you'll be able to download the whole presentation once it's finished. You might need to wait for the platform to sort of finish processing it, but then it should be available later today. Henk asks, what was CRA again? So the CRA is the European Cyber Resilience Act, which is quite a broad framework for basically, devices, toys, pets, computers, sat-nav systems, everything that has a digital element these days will be, if it's going to be sold in Europe, it will need to be subject to the requirements of the CRA. These can be quite complicated, and no one really is an expert yet because it's all quite new, but we've got these presentations coming up about CRA. So I think that kind of probably wraps it up for questions now. If there are further questions which I haven't answered, you can either contact us directly by this link I put on the page. You can find us also on LinkedIn. You can ask a question there, and hopefully we can get in touch. But I think we've kind of run out of time now. Anyway, thank you again for watching, and it's been great to see the questions coming in. And I hope to see you on a webinar very soon. Thank you and good day.